So I've been playing Prophecy for a little over a week now and have probably around 50 matches under my belt, so I'm going to give my initial thoughts on the game, what it does well, some improvements I think could be made, and my overall thoughts. Keep in mind this game is in pre-alpha right now and pretty much everything is up for change at this point in the game's development, so any criticism or praise I make in this video could easily be reversed by the time the game actually launches to the public. But with that said, let's start with the good and what this game does well. So I'll kick it off with an obvious one that's apparent from the moment you load up the game. It looks great, especially for a pre-alpha build. The animations are super smooth and look realistic. To be honest, a lot of the animations in this game look better than Smite's animations, which is where they were sourced. The models and texture quality is also really solid. Once again, some of the gods and units look better than their equivalents in Smite, especially the heroes. Plus, the item and trait artwork is really high quality, even if some of the item art is just recolored Smite artwork. It works for now, and I imagine they're mostly placeholder, and by the time the game launches there will be custom art for all of the items. In terms of performance, the game runs really well for me. My PC is pretty high end, so I would expect it to, and I'm not sure how well the game runs on lower end PCs, but in my experience I've had no performance issues at all really. The game runs at the 144 FPS cap of my monitor consistently at maximum graphical quality, so I can't really complain. If anything, I want a way to cap my FPS down to 60 so my PC isn't as noisy for recording when I play. So for an alpha build of the game, it gets my seal of approval for performance. But once again, that's just my experience, it could vary drastically based on your PC specs. So if you've had a chance to try the game and have a bit of a lower end PC or a laptop, let me know how it runs on that. So another huge positive of Prophecy is the trait system. Keep in mind this is my first auto chess style game, I didn't play Underlords or TFT or anything, so I have no idea if other games have a system like this, but in Prophecy it's a really cool way to add depth and strategy to the game. Especially the fact that not all traits are available in every game, you only get a selection of the total trait pool in every match. It forces you to adapt to the game and not just go for the exact same comp every time, which in my opinion is a great way to get people to experiment with different builds, rather than just finding the most OP trait in the game and rolling for it every single time. The variety in traits is also pretty huge considering this is just an alpha. Even the traits that effectively do the same thing, like Wisdom, Spirit and Resourceful, which all give you increased mana gain, they do it in different ways. Wisdom gives you one-time mana up front at the start of combat, Spirit gives passive regen of mana over time, and Resourceful gives extra mana gain from attacks, so each one of these traits, while doing effectively the same thing in the end, are all useful on different team comps and in different situations, so there is a reason to pick one up over the others. And of course, the trait variety in general is pretty crazy. There's 40 total traits as of recording, and most of them do completely unique things, which adds so much replayability to the game. Which, speaking of, the whole replayability aspect is more of a symptom of the genre as a whole, but that doesn't mean it's not a positive aspect of Prophecy. Between the different heroes, items, units, traits, and attack RNG in the fights, no two matches are ever the same, even if you go for a similar composition with similar traits or the same hero. Even with the comparative lack of content in the game, given it's an alpha build, it still feels like there's a lot to do, and I haven't found myself getting bored or repeating what I've done before. At least for now, there's always something new to try. And finally, a hot topic among multiplayer games these days, the balance of Prophecy in my opinion deserves to be in the positive section. There has been and still are some pretty broken things that need nerfing or changing entirely. The light trait, before they nerfed it recently, made you immune to CC and negative effects, which included anti-heal, so light plus any form of healing was pretty much an insta-win with no counters, but the devs have been pretty attentive to that stuff and light was reworked recently so it's not as broken. There are still some unbalanced things like the ice trait, 100% evasion chance, Sobek, Bologna, etc, but in general the game is fairly balanced and the areas where it isn't are being worked on pretty quickly by the devs, especially when you consider this is a pre-alpha build. It feels like you can do well and at least top 4 with most comps unless you're trolling and literally picking things with no synergy at all, like putting intelligence on hunters or whatever. As long as you have some sense of a composition with some synergy, you can do pretty well, which is either a sign of a reasonably balanced game, or most players not really knowing what they're doing, or both. But with that said, let's move into the negative section where I'll discuss some things I think need changing in the game or that I don't like about it. I'll just state once more here that this game is an alpha build and a lot of the stuff I say here can and probably will be fixed or changed in the coming weeks or months of the game's development. But nonetheless, they are present in the game right now and I have to mention them as negatives. So on that topic, I'll just quickly mention at the start here that the game has a few bugs. Not an insane amount, and for the most part they don't massively impact the game, but issues such as units getting body blocked by their allies and not pathfinding to enemies correctly so they just stand there and do nothing, units getting to max mana but never casting their abilities even if they're not silenced no matter how long they live, and a few others do have an impact on the game. As I said, this is literally the earliest build of the game that is publicly available, so of course bugs will be found, and it's more about how the dev team deals with the bugs than the bugs existing themselves. The whole danger zone mechanic, in my opinion, needs changing or at least fixing. Right now, you can only be eliminated from the game if someone else also dies at the same time as you, otherwise you live on 1 HP. The issue with this is that people can cheese higher placements than they really should have got. I've seen enemies do it and done it myself where, for example, you get danger zoned at 6th place, so in theory you should lose the game at 6th place, but you then stay alive for several more turns waiting for someone else to die. At which point, when you do eventually die, you can take 5th place, which just shouldn't happen in my opinion. I'm not sure exactly how it works, I think it's based on who took more damage when you were both eliminated, but players that should have lost a long time ago can steal places which they don't deserve, which I don't think should happen. So either a player that gets danger zoned is locked into the placement they were at the time, assuming they die of course, or replace the system with something like Hearthstone Battlegrounds Kel'Thuzad, where a player dies and their board state simply remains the same, and players will fight with the dead guy if there's an odd number of players left in the lobby. So a more general thing about the gameplay of Prophecy is that the game pace feels really strange. Leveling the shop is far too cheap for the most part, and a lot of the time you reach max level shop before or just after the first players are eliminated. For me, I feel like max level shop and legendary units should be the things that you only really reach in the late game, maybe when there's about 4 players left or something, rather than something pretty much everyone gets access to in the mid game. Also, the early game seems kind of irrelevant, especially in terms of damage you take. You can lose the first 5 combats and only take about 10% of your health, which in the long run really means nothing, if you get a good comp going. Whereas in the late game, you can lose 2 unlucky fights and take 50 damage, which just seems a bit strange to me. I feel like they should smooth things out a bit to make the early game a little more relevant, slow down the pace of shop upgrades, and maybe even add additional benefits to upgrading the shop, like an additional trait slot at 5 and another item slot at 7, maybe even another unit slot at 9, so that it's more beneficial to level the shop but also more expensive. Because right now it's extremely cheap and easy to level the shop, but all you really get is more rare units and of course those extra board slots which are really important. In terms of items and traits, leveling the shop kinda does nothing, so having an extra shop space for those as you level up would be nice in my opinion. So another gripe I have with the game is in the combat system, specifically its timer and speed up function. Due to the time limit on combats, some of them will end without an actual winner, with people still having units alive because of time limitations. This is why combat speeds up as it goes longer. Now the reason for this is that some combats will just go on forever due to sustain, immunities, evasion and things like that, so there needs to be a cutoff at some point to stop infinite fights. But the cutoff needs to be longer in my opinion, or the speed of combat needs to be increased more so that the combat can have more time before it cuts. Because right now, a lot of fights that are clearly going to end in the next few seconds get cut off. In these cases, the winner is decided by who did the most damage in the fight, which means you can get some pretty bullshit losses that shouldn't really happen. Especially if you're a healing or tanky comp that doesn't do that much damage but wins through sustain or high HP and defenses. You enjoy the longer fights, but if you reach that cutoff point, you instantly lose the fight when you are going to win simply because the enemy did more total damage than you. So this needs to be changed ASAP in my opinion because it shafts healing and tank comps super hard. You could maybe also fix this by choosing a winner based on the number of units left, excluding tokens and pets, but I think increasing the speed or combat time would help with this. That's all the negatives, so I'll just give my final thoughts overall on the game before we finish this video off. So overall, Prophecy is really fun and has a lot of promise. The core concept and mechanics of the game, such as traits, items and leaders, are solid and it has massive replayability value. There's not too much content in the game right now, but it is a pre-alpha build and there are already plans to add things to the game in that respect. Some areas need work and some bugs need fixing, but in general this game is pretty well polished, looks amazing, and runs quite well for an alpha build made by a fairly unknown studio. So that's it for my initial thoughts on Prophecy after a week or so of playing. Things will change, and if you're watching this video in the far future, the game probably looks very different to how it does now as of the recording of this. But I think this game has huge potential. I'll catch you guys in another Smite video tomorrow, or more Prophecy next Thursday if that's what you're here for. Peace out, you nerds.